If you're involved with the metal, hardcore, or the punk scene, you probably already know what moshing is. The term moshing is pretty synonymous with like the images people have in their head of like what a metal show or what like a hardcore show looks like. But despite this, moshing might not be something that you actually think about really hard, especially if you're not the type of person who is really getting into the pit and like moshing yourself. So that's what I want to talk about today. So, what is moshing? While this might seem like a simple question on paper, it's actually a little more complicated than that, at least for me, because there are a lot of different ways that people mosh, and they differ a lot, especially depending on like what subculture and like what genres the people who are moshing are like in, and like what music is playing, stuff like that, right? At least in the metal scene, when people talk about moshing, they're usually talking about like slam dancing. And slam dancing involves really like slamming into each other, pushing each other, stuff like that, right? And that's what generally moshing is when you're talking about the metal scene. But there are a lot of also other different types of moshing, right? In communities known for more aggressive moshing, like hardcore and punk, hitting and like punching the air and sometimes other moshers is more common, and some people call this like karate moshing. So some other notable variants of moshing include like two-stepping, which is pretty common in like punk and hardcore pits, where like you're kicking and you're punching the air, right? It's like more of a dance move, right? And this is actually derived directly from skanking, which is a different type of physical movement, which we'll talk about later. Another type of moshing is the wall of death, which is more common in like metal than anything else, where basically the pit divides into two large groups and they run into each other in like a big wall, right? That's why it's called the wall of death. And it's actually a particularly dangerous form of moshing, because it's really easy to get like crushed and like squished. Another very common type of moshing in like metal circles is circle pits, where everyone like runs in a circle around the mosh pit and like they're like pushing each other and slamming into each other like that. Another thing that I would be neglectful to like not mention is like stage diving and like crowd surfing, which isn't exactly moshing, but it is pretty common and something that you'll see in like pits and stuff, especially with like metal, punk, hardcore. Like that's pretty common, especially when like someone in the pit, they'll hoist someone else up and they'll throw them, and that's how they'll crowd surf, right? Because usually you're not gonna have people who are going onto the stage nowadays because people don't like that, and it's more like a thing in underground or like basement shows, which you'll see, which don't very often have a stage. Although it's not what I'm focusing on, I think it's really important to mention the people who stand on the edge of the pit, because they're as much of a vital part to it as like anyone in the pit as well. So being on the edge of the pit, it's fun in its own way. People there, they'll help push people back when they get like flung out, especially if it's like slam dancing, right? And they'll stick their forearms out to make sure that other people don't get hit, especially when people are like flailing their arms, right? Especially if there's crowd killing, if you know what that is. And they're pretty essential because they act as a barrier to the pit for the people who don't want to get involved physically, right? Because not everyone wants to be like into that, right? Which is totally okay. But they're a very important part of the mosh pit too. The main difference between hardcore moshing and metal moshing is in hardcore and punk, it's mainly two-stepping and like karate type moshing, whereas metal moshing is mostly pushing and like slamming into each other. So like hardcore punk, right, the group is focusing on like dramatic motions without contact with other moshers, while metal moshing is focusing on contact without these like dramatic movements, right? But all in all, the primary element of moshing is being in a group with other people in this dedicated space and being physical in like an aggressive way. Okay, so now I'm going to touch on the history of moshing. And the history, it's not very concrete because moshing was something that kind of came up in more underground circles, so we kind of just have to take people's word for it. We don't have very specific things that we can point to, but that doesn't matter because we're going to go into it anyway. So, as with a lot of things that are like known in metal scenes today, we have to start with punk to get kind of the history of it, right? So before moshing, there was pogo dancing, which is basically people would stand and they would just jump up and down, right? And it was supposedly invented by the bassist for Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious. One could also like attribute the origins of moshing to skanking, because the dancing is similar, and skanking came from like ska, right? And ska punk is also like very popular as well, but moshing was definitely invented in the US and not the UK, where the Sex Pistols are like from, right? And it was specifically invented in California, right? The exact origin is unknown, but its rise is like attributed to the Huntington Beach area and the Long Beach areas of California. The first like person whose style was like colloquially coined as like a type of moshing, or like the first like person to kind of like do that sort of thing, was this guy. His name was Mike Marine, and he was known for like his aggressive style. He would get in and he would swing his arms like in a circle, like you'll see people do a lot nowadays. And it was coined as the Huntington Beach strut. So he's thought of today as like one of the first people who like invented moshing. But the term moshing, it gradually became more popular, and it wasn't really like coined until like there are different points one can attribute the word moshing to, but the first like person to like use it in like an official song or something like that was the band Stormtroopers of Death, which is a crossover thrash band. More people will know it as S.O.D. And S.O.D is actually it's a spin-off of the like more well-known band Anthrax, but S.O.D wrote this song called the Milano Mosh, which is actually like named after the band member Billy Milano. And this song released on their album Speak English or Die, which was a crossover thrash album, right? And crossover thrash is a crossover of hardcore and thrash metal, so that's why it was really influential, because there you had people from the metal scene and people from the hardcore scene were like getting together and kind of like working together. They were being together in the pit, and they were taking these style influences from each other, right? And so the term moshing was like already used in like the metal and the hardcore scene, but like we didn't like know like terms like skanking and like slam dancing yet, because like they were also used in the like hardcore and the punk scene. So the release of the Milano Mosh like solidified the term mosh in the like communities that moshing was in, right? So that's where it was really solidified, and then the use of that term was also later like extra solidified because the band Anthrax, which I mentioned earlier, who is very popular, they released the song Caught in a Mosh, which became very popular as well. I'm not gonna go into it in this video, but moshing also has like a pretty consistent like history of controversy because it's violent, right? And so people get hurt, right? So people in mosh pits, they've gotten seriously injured. Some people have even died, right? So it's had a lot of controversy. I will say though, in a mosh pit, people's intentions is like almost never to like actually injure people, because it's like a group activity. It's like something that has a sense of community to it. And there are like rules when you're going into a pit, unwritten, but there's still like common courtesy and etiquette, right? So when you're like moshing, you have to understand like the risks. Like you're gonna get hurt if you're in a mosh pit or if you're on the edge of a mosh pit, right? So I think generally speaking, like moshing is dancing. It's not like beating people up. It's not like getting people injured on purpose, right? So that's all I'll have to say for like the controversy side of it. But also, I'm clearly biased, so form your own opinion on it, right? So when we're looking at the question, why do people mosh? I think there's less than like a direct answer. There are like many different reasons different people mosh, right? But I think if you break it down to the essentials, it's has to do with like physical expression and like moving your body, right? Because it's no secret that like a lot of people, when they hear music, they like want to move, right? That's why people dance. That's why people like tap their feet when they hear a song. That's why people like crump. That's why people dance like at all, right? But I think when it comes to like moshing, it's not exactly like traditional dancing, right? Because like with slam dancing and stuff, you don't have to be very skilled with moving your body, because it's not supposed to be this like elegant, like very pretty looking thing, right? And it's aggressive, right? And I think aggression is also at the heart of why people mosh, right? Because you're listening to music that's like usually angry, right? It's angry about something. It's aggressive music. And so you're gonna wanna express yourself in a like more aggressive, more angry way, right? When we look at metal that's like more on the sad side, like for example, black metal, which is in its own way aggressive, but it's different, right? A lot of people in the black metal community have a different sentiment. Like you'll hear the term, like the phrase, no mosh, no core, no trends, no fun, no controversy. So like black metal, a lot of the time people won't mosh because they have these different ideas, right? Same with like doom metal, right? Like doom metal's a lot less aggressive. It's more like relaxed, more chill. So people don't really mosh to doom metal either. So it's all different. But I think the reason a lot of people mosh as well is because there's a sense of community to it. If you fall down in a mosh pit, you know someone's gonna be there to pick you up. If someone hurts you, you just like, you laugh it off because you know like that's what it's about, right? I think also like metal, when it comes to like metal, hardcore, and punk, when you're moshing, you're taking away some of the focus from the band itself, right? And you're taking it back and putting that focus into the space that you're in and the community and the people you're with who are moving with you together. And you start to like enjoy the music in a different way, and you get to enjoy the space in a different way than you would if you were just sitting there listening to it, right? Plus, you know that there are people there who will be there to back you up. So I think you get to enjoy the experience in a different way when you're moshing as opposed to just watching the show normally. But all that being said, I think this is putting into words something that doesn't really need them or doesn't really have to have them, right? If you watch people in a mosh pit, or if you get in a mosh pit yourself, you kind of understand the energy and the emotions like behind it in a different way than you would just analyzing it yourself, right? So I think if you want to really understand it, you know, get in the pit yourself, right? But don't be surprised if like you end up with a couple bruises the morning after. Just, you know, you have to just enjoy it for what it is, right? Thank you.